Sega.
As Zaxxon was a big hit, Sega decided to release an enhanced Super version of the game in late 1982. They upgraded the game in the standard way, made it faster, more colourful, harder, and added space dragons. Wait, what? Yep, the Zaxxon robots have been replaced by dragons. In space. Therefore, space dragons. We'll start by looking at the original arcade from 1982, running on Zaxxon specific hardware. Then we'll look at the PC booter port from 1984. It supported CGA graphics with two different outputs, 4-colour RGB and 16-colour composite. We'll take a look at both in this video. I'm using the DOSBox staging variant for this. A big shout out to pixelatedarcade.com for this copy of Super Zaxxon. The arcade version was offered in two flavours, either as an upgrade pack for the original Zaxxon or as a new standalone cabinet. However, it wasn't as successful as the original game. The intro sequence begins with a longer demo than the original game before your ship collides with a wall and the space dragon reveals the name of the game. This then loops, showing different parts of the game. When you start the game, two things become apparent: the massively increased speed and the sheer difficulty. Luckily I set the game up to have endless lives, otherwise this video would be pretty short. One notable change is that if you fly high up, there's no player seeking missile on the first level, but that doesn't make the game much easier. As with the original Zaxxon, you have to shoot the red fuel tanks in order to stop your fuel running out. As per the original, you fly initially over a space fortress, then, halfway through, instead of going into space, you now dive into a tunnel with limited height and new mine-laying enemies attempting to block your progress. After the tunnel, it's on to another section of Space Fortress, where you have some tiny spaces to get through before you confront not one, but 3 space dragons in a row at the end of the level. Remember, super equals more difficult, right? As per the original, should you hit each one enough times you'll destroy it, but if you fail and it escapes, you'll get a lower level completion score. After the dragons, you start a new, even harder level, and our old friend the player seeking missile makes an unwelcome return. Now, watch me try to complete the first level of the game. Luckily I've set it to have endless lives. PC port arrived in 1984, handled by Sega themselves. It came on a PC booter disc, so you just pop the disc in, turn on the computer and it plays. As mentioned earlier, the PC version supports CGA graphics hardware. Usually this means that the game, like the original Zaxxon, is limited to just 4 colours. However, Super Zaxxon is one of a small number of games to also support the CGA Composite output too. This, by way of a mix of clever programming and relying on the blurriness of CRT screens at the time, allowed 16 colours to be displayed instead. We'll look at both versions. First up, the standard CGA version. The RGB version uses a red, orange, green and black 4-colour mode. It's not terribly nice to look at. It's hard to see where you're going due to the limited colours, but at least it looks a lot more like the arcade than the original Zaxxon port. It's interesting to note the scores at the top left are chopped off. This seems to be an issue with the game rather than DOSBox. Another issue is that the game relies on the computer running at 4.77 MHz, otherwise graphical glitches will occur. I set up DOSBox carefully to avoid this. Here's the tunnel sequence, which looks pretty harsh too and lasts way too long. There's also a bug in the PC port, as you can fly over all the bad guys in the tunnel, which you can't do in the arcade version. That makes the tunnel sequences quite boring. The Space Dragon also looks pretty dreadful in CGA RGB, and rather slow. It's hard to tell whether you're hitting it, destroyed it, or if it ran away, as the screen always flashes yellow. Let's move on to the much better looking CGA Composite version. Straight away, the CGA Composite version looks amazing by comparison. The DOSBox staging version, which I'm using here, emulates the blur you get on a CRT screen, so it's not 100% accurate to a real-life CGA card, but it's close enough. Once again, the scores in the top left are chopped off. I've seen this happening on a real-life CGA card on another YouTube video, so it seems to be a bug with the game. The game is easier than the arcade, as you can fly over most hazards, and the player-seeking missile doesn't appear, even on level 2. The tunnel sequence looks way better than the CGA RGB version, but again, the fly over everyone trick works here, unlike the arcade version. And the Space Dragon looks better too, but it's still just as slow with flickery movement. Now, watch me play through the first level of this game. I'll stick to just the CGA Composite version, as the RGB version is pretty tough to watch. Apologies for the sound, the developers thought spaceships would constantly bleep, I guess. Let's compare the games at the pixel level. First up, here's the arcade version at the start of the first level. Now I'll wipe over to the CGA RGB version and, well, they're very different. Going back to the arcade, let's now wipe across to the CGA Composite version. It looks good, but in no way arcade perfect. Finally, and this is most interesting, watch as I fade between the CGA RGB version and CGA Composite version. It's interesting to see how upgraded the graphics became when you change versions, and definitely shows the CGA Composite version is the best way to experience Super Zaxxon on PC. Now, let's put the arcade CGA RGB and CGA Composite versions head to head. The arcade version is extremely difficult and not really as nice to play as the original due to how quickly you'll die. The PC port is fascinating with its choice between CGA options. CGA Composite is a nice way to play the game and a bit easier than the arcade due to it being slightly less frantic. If you like this look at Super Zaxxon, then please like this video and subscribe to find out when the next video is available.